Hi, everybody.
Kill the sound on your computer.
Thanks. All right. We'll start again. Welcome, everybody, to the Beverly School panel on race. We are very excited this evening to hear from students, parents, and teachers. But before we begin, I just wanted to take a moment of silence. Today is the one-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd, and I would like to not only think about him, but all those who have been shot and killed over this past year and in previous years. So just join me in a moment of silence. All right, so before we have introductions from our panelists, I wanted to say a couple words about what we're going to be doing tonight. And as probably most of you know, Beverly Public Schools performed an equity audit earlier in the year, and Dr. Charochak and Morgan have held some panel discussions to go through some of the details and questions about that equity audit. So tonight we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We are going to be hearing from some of those most directly involved with the schooling, and that is students and teachers and parents, to hear from them what some of their ideas are for moving forward, some of their concerns, some of their ideas. And so we would like to, first I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, and then I will start with a couple of questions myself, and then we will open it up from the chat for the audience members to put questions in the chat. So we welcome you to do that at any time. And yeah, we look forward to a good discussion tonight. So Abu, why don't we start with you? We'll just go around, and if you can say your name and your role in the school, sort of why you're here.
My name is Abu Toppin. I'm a parent of two kids in the school system, one at the elementary school level and one at the middle school level, and I'm here to contribute to our conversation.
Hi, I'm Dr. Charochak. I'm the superintendent of schools, and I am really excited and thankful for all of you for joining us and looking forward to the discussion tonight.
Hi, good evening. André Morgan, Director of Opportunity, Access, and Equity for Beverly Public Schools. Excited to be here tonight. I speak regularly about folks coming to the table in honest conversation and dialogue around race and racism. And so I'm glad to be able to model that and come to the table with this group of friends to start the dialogue.
Thank you. And I'm Lauren Bartold, as I mentioned, program developer for the Heathmere Center. We're a local nonprofit that does dialogue programming in communities. And with me, who doesn't have a mic, is Lizzie McBride. She's our summer intern.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Julie Smith. I'm the principal at the Centerville Elementary School in Beverly, and I'm always happy to be a part of any conversation that makes Beverly even better.
I'm Avyanna Sem, and I'm a junior attending Beverly High School, and I'm glad to contribute my thoughts and opinions on how to improve our community and around students of color and faculty of color.
Hello, I'm Heather Matulewicz. I'm a counselor here at Beverly Middle School, and I am very honored to be at this table and be contributing to this conversation.
I am Jacob Klass, a 7th grade student at Beverly Middle School, and I'm excited to be in this conversation.
Great. Thank you very much. And again, this is a school night, so we particularly thank the teachers, students, principals, and Dr. Morgan, parents, for being here. So I'm going to start off with a question, and I welcome any of our panelists to answer it. In what ways do you see Beverly Public Schools promoting equity right now? And as you think about answering, maybe share some specific examples that you've seen in the past couple of months.
I will begin. I really enjoy being able to be at the middle school and seeing some projects and contributions that students have made around cultural enrichment and just brave, bold discussions that are taking place in classrooms. And, students just give us such amazing insight. And I think honoring their voices is such an important role for faculty. And so I've really enjoyed having the space for that here at the middle school. I also have seen Beverly offering a lot of professional development around race, cultural awareness, both through Massachusetts Partnership for Youth and some in-house opportunities that we've had within our district, book clubs around grading for equity, and just being able to be in and out of various 8th grade classrooms and seeing some of the work that teachers and students are doing collaboratively has been awesome.
Yeah, Julie.
I would just like to add, because when I reflect on the last year or so, I think about Beverly's ability to just sort of have this do whatever it takes mentality. When we think about all the different ways that kids were coming to school, whether we needed to create a remote academy for families who wanted that, whether we needed to get out technology resources or connectivity, I think that Beverly really tried to think of, find out what barriers existed in our community and work to remove them for families to serve children well, especially over the last year. So I think that the ways that we flexibly responded to whatever students and families needed was something that I'm proud of. And I think that we've learned a lot more about our families and getting closer with them.
Great, thank you. Does anybody else want to add anything to that? Any of the students or yeah, Dr. Charochak.
So I just, it strikes me as I listen to what you're all saying and the ways that you're defining it. And I believe that we've spent time in Beverly thinking about meeting the needs of all students, and we've really done it. But I think one of the most important things I've seen is the shift to the intentionality behind addressing issues of race, or issues of culture or ethnicity, and really making it at the forefront and like laying that lens over what we do and what we say, so that we're expanding the way that we look at things and the way that we talk about things. And I think really thinking that we're focusing on the intentionality of what we're doing and making sure that that race is not something that we're not looking at. And I know that sounds weird, but I think in the past we probably didn't look at it as intentionally as we should. So I think that's one area of that.
Great, thanks. Yeah, Abu.
I'd just like to echo that sentiment that since I've been in Beverly probably about 11, 12 years now, never before, at least in my estimation, had I really seen a sincere effort to, as Dr. Charochak mentioned, be intentional. And I think that we need to do that in order to advance and move the discussion forward and to better our community. And I think what the school district has done, coming in with Dr. Morgan and executing on the equity audit, from the beginning, really showed that intention to, pay a close eye and look at what we're discussing, how we're approaching our curriculum, how we're approaching our teachers, our students, our families, and giving it a comprehensive but thoughtful approach to the discussion and the attention that it deserves. So I've seen that progress has been remarkable in my eyes.
Right. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Anybody else? So let's back up a little bit. I mean, part of the reason there was a reason for this equity audit, and I want to ask the question about white culture and how does a school that's dominated by white culture, and this isn't to point at Beverly, all schools are, as we know, we live in a culture in the United States very much dominated by white culture. How does the dominant white culture affect your school and your classroom? And in particular, what way do you think students experience these effects? So how do you see specific examples of white culture affecting your classroom? How does it play out in the day-to-day?
Well, I can speak to, the representation within faculty and staff. And, I know that it's a goal, an intention focused goal of Beverly to have a staff that is more representative of our student body. And I think that is quite apparent as you walk around our schools. And, that's something that students, teachers love their students and students love their teachers. And it's important to feel that you can, see different people represented within your leaders and your student and your teachers and your faculty. And I think, that's something that is very clear when you walk around the schools in Beverly. And so I look forward to, the faculty and staff representing more of the student body so that students can have teachers that they can see themselves in, in many different ways. And I think that is really powerful for the students to see, extremely important for the students to see. And I think moving with that very specific intention is a definite positive direction and a necessary direction.
Thank you. Great.
I would just say that if in a predominantly white culture in your school system, there's a one-sided approach. And so, that affects students of color because they're only seeing, one aspect, one lens, one history, and one representation with faculty and staff that doesn't reflect where they may have come from or what they experience in their families. And same is true for other students who are white students and white families here. They're only getting one side of it as well. So, so the issue is the goal should be, which is where I think we're heading, is having these discussions and opening up that conversation and introducing the culture and the history and other aspects of what we all should know about each other. And that will make all of us more well-rounded, will give all of us an opportunity to better understand each other, better understand the issues that we face in the community here and at large. And that will foster that conversation. So if those concepts or a different lens is introduced, we can then have a real conversation and discussion about what's happening to all of us and how these different issues affect us all. But if it's only, one lens or one opportunity to learn one perspective, then we don't have an opportunity to really make up that ground. And so that's why that intention and what we're doing with the equity audit and the other changes that we're heading to do in the school district as well as in the city is important to the issues.
Great, thank you. And just to look at some questions in the chat here, we did have a question about a definition of white culture. So thank you for asking that. It's important that we all have a clear understanding. I don't know if one of the teachers want to speak to that. How do you, when you think about, or maybe Dr. Morgan, when you think about changing away and brought from a narrowly focused curriculum on white culture and broadening in order to create true education, as Abu just spoke of, how do you think of this definition of white culture? What does that mean in the curriculum? I don't know if either of you want to.
Well, so it's interesting, as Abu was speaking, I was thinking, and Heather mentioned the representation in the staff and in terms of the people, but really and truly there's a focus of the curriculum as well too, right? And so how can we find ways to bring more of that in? And so I know, for example, the taking a look at the literature that we're reading and taking a look at the perspective that we're teaching from. So is it a Eurocentric perspective on the social studies or on a specific happening in history, or is there a broader opportunity to take a look at what we're doing? And so I do think that in most suburbs, not Beverly alone, the focus has always had this very specific, I mean, the school, the way that we learned and the novels that we read and the literature that we read, a lot of the white culture is passing that on, and that's what we know, and so that's what we share. And so back to intentionality, making sure that what we look at and what we do, we're expanding what we're thinking, how we're thinking, and what we're sharing, so that students see themselves in the work that we're doing and see themselves in the things that we're learning about. So, and I don't know if you want to.
Well said.
Yeah. Does anybody want to add to that? Because again, I think it's an important question to get clear on.
I'll add to that a bit because I have seen a very specific intention with literature that I've seen throughout this year, and giving students options to introduce authors and to make suggestions for reading material that teachers have been excited about giving students voice to that. And I think that, I just, when you're speaking about it, I love the concept of like mirrors and windows, and that's of course an older concept, but it's just, I think it's so important to see oneself for learning and developing, and then to see something through the eyes of someone else. There's just such powerful learning for all students of every race and every ethnicity, to just learn from the experience of someone else, and that's just incredibly powerful.
Great, thank you. Anybody else want to add to that? So then Abu had already, we started to answer the question about the way in which white culture is affecting your school and classroom. Did anybody else want to weigh in? I know there were actually a couple comments in the chat wanting to hear from students, but I don't want to put you on the spot. Or anybody else that wants to speak to that. We can come back to it too if you think of some things. So one question, I actually just wanted to do a little bit of a follow-up from the first question. I think this was a comment from Heather, and you talked about the way in which you see the district promoting sort of brave, bold discussions. And I'd love to hear some specific examples of that from any of you, even as a parent, examples that your kids have brought home. Can you make it sort of concrete for those of us who aren't in the classroom ourselves? Some examples of what that looked like, the brave, bold discussions look like?
So I was actually going to exercise a little bit of silence in this conversation, and this is probably an appropriate time for me to jump in, if you will. And so I want to kind of tackle a couple of things, Lauren, that you brought to the table. You would ask for my opinion about the definition of white culture. And so I want to kind of go back to that, if you will, and met that into the reason and the purpose why we have difficult conversations and conversations more explicitly around race. And so as we talk about white culture, what we're really talking about is whiteness and the white racialized identity roles that become a part of white people's customs and heritage, and which guides our practices and our discussions and the way that we live life on a day-to-day basis. And so why is it important to really talk about this in the classroom? Because we have students that do not come from that background. And as we look across the nation, we have more and more of a changing demographic. As mentioned a little earlier, it's important for all students to be able to see themselves in the context of their education. But what this means in the wider scope is, how are we addressing this issue in a way that doesn't marginalize students as they think about becoming change agents in the future, but how do they step up as students of color and as students collectively to be able to call out those things that are wrong, that are inequitable, and that are problematic in terms of helping everybody to get to their place of provision, if you will, in order for everybody to be successful. And so that becomes part of our focus. It's not an easy solution to the challenges, but as we talk about white dominant culture more specifically, we're talking about how do we get away from a sole Eurocentric perspective and include some other perspectives. That's in our conversations. That's in our curriculum. That's in our culture. That's in the way that we do things on a day-to-day basis. That's in the way that we stand up and we show up whenever we walk into a school or whenever we walk into a meeting or whenever we do something that where we represent Beverly Public Schools. And so it becomes that particular context. And so the second part of your question is, what are some of the things that we've done that have kind of been out of the box, if you will, and certainly each of the people around the table have been in different circumstances and situations where we've done some specific equity related work. Since we're sitting in the middle school library, one of the things that we've done is we did a conversation around race and racism, quite honestly, with 7th and 8th grade students. And Jacob, if you remember that conversation, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but if you feel like you want to tell us what you thought about it, whether it was impactful or not, we'd certainly love to hear that perspective. But it was a conversation that we had with students because we recognized and we heard from students that they weren't having these conversations at home. And in order to kind of learn more about what they were seeing in the traditional media and on social media, they were bringing these conversations and these questions, asking, what does this really mean? And this is something that's new, and how do we stand this up? And why are you talking about it now? So I think the why is important, and we talked about the why a little earlier. But we had that conversation in your face, very transparent. How do you stand up against elements of racism? We also talked about what it was. How it manifests in classrooms, how it manifests in students' home lives, how they manifest in communities. And so we took an approach to how students can stand up against these things. Now, we're not unrealistic in a way that means that we do these one and done discussions and everybody's suddenly an expert. That's not how it works. But it's bringing people to the table to have these conversations, and even in discomfort, to be able to stay at the table, continue to have the conversation, especially when someone disagrees with you, and be able to share your perspective, hear somebody else's perspective, and then look for a resolution in terms of how you can partner together to really make some inherent change.
Yeah, thank you. I hear that. I mean, teaching kids not just facts and history, exposing them to various readings in the curriculum, but also really teaching them how to not just talk, but listen, right? Which is how I usually like to sort of define dialogue, as really more about listening. And as we see, some adults in this country need some good examples from kids. So I hope you all are listening there. So does anybody want to follow up on that?
I just want to say that that's what Dr. Morgan just described is absolutely true for this setting, but for us adults as well, right? Especially, and to the importance of being present in a conversation. Again, you give and you also receive, and being open to that. And I think that's very critical in our conversations going forward about race. Yeah. And just an example I wanted to kind of call out, I just thought about as folks were talking, my daughter participated in a project in her classroom where they asked each student to bring something of their culture into the classroom and explain what it is, where it comes from, and the history behind it. I'm African American. My wife is of Greek descent, so she had lots of different things that she could have chosen. And but I said to her, if you will, why don't you bring in a broom that slaves used to use in their marriage ceremonies, and the ceremony process was called jumping the broom. And when my mother and stepfather were married 25 years ago, they went through that part of that culture and jumped the broom at their wedding. And so she was able to provide that for us, and my daughter was able to bring that to her school and talk about what that meant and the cultural and historical significance of what that was. And then a lot of other kids were like, wow, I've never even heard that. I don't think the teacher actually had heard of that. But there again, there's that opportunity for, even with that small project, it seems, that's kind of, small in the grand scheme of things, but large as well, because she introduced some culture and some history that a lot of folks did not have an opportunity to know about prior to that.
Right.
So now they leave that day different than when they began that day, with some education.
Yeah, that's great. Any other follow-ups to that point? Yeah, Julie.
Oh, excuse me. I think I'd like to chip in from the elementary perspective. When we start talking about some of these conversations with race and culture, some of our very young students don't have a language to even describe their own identities, very many. They don't really know who they are. And so I feel that particularly for us, our journey or our path is really looking at identity development for kids, bringing their voices in, having them hear, from their peers in the ways that they're similar and they're different. But I feel very strongly that the work we're doing with our younger children right now is just to give them that sense of identity so that they can understand some of the deeper implications of culture and race and difference. Because we were finding that they just did not have a language to have some of those discussions, to understand what maybe some of this is around them, that there's some of the stuff that's going on around them. So I just wanted to kind of chip in when you think about kindergartners and first graders and or students with disabilities. Very often students don't even have the language to describe that in themselves and understand how that makes them part of their community. And I would always advocate for us to be more literal and clear with helping students develop that language for themselves.
Thank you. Yeah. And I just want to intervene at one point and just remind folks watching that the chat feature is really for asking questions of the panelists. And as we've just been talking about difficult dialogue and discussions, we know that this is a difficult and heated issue for many, but we would just like to reserve this time in the chat really for questions of the panelists. And I would ask that you hold off commenting on each other's comments in the chat. And if it gets distracting, for if you're frustrated or distracted, maybe just turn the chat off on your own device. But I just did want to put that out there right now. But looking at just one follow-up question from a concern in the chat, and this sort of touches on what Abu was speaking about. So, we're all familiar with Dr. Martin Luther King's aspirational statement that he hopes that his children will be judged not by the color of their skin, but by their character. And I appreciated your emphasis on culture, because sometimes I think that can be translated into the fact that he said that we shouldn't, or that we don't see color. And so I think this can be a concern of people when they say, well, I don't want to see color. But I maybe this is sort of a follow-up just to continue the comments regarding culture, because how people, I don't want to get into an argument here about what people see, implicit bias, et cetera, but rather, again, really turning the focus to how is it that kids learn and what is brought into the classroom by diversity. And, I think the point about European culture is crucial. I did not attend Beverly schools. I didn't live in Massachusetts as a child. And but I will just add this one point, that I have several higher degrees. And during those degrees, I read 0 people of color. And since that time, afterwards, I've graduated and I've been immersing myself in this literature. I feel that I want my money back from my education, because it wasn't full-blooded. It wasn't rich. So again, I'm not speaking from the Beverly perspective here, but just wanted to add my personal experience about the richness of diversity. So with that said, does anybody else want to sort of pick up on that aspirational claim of Dr. Martin Luther King and how we struggle with this? Of course, we don't want to judge people. We don't want to see people differently, but history has shown that there is differences. There are different cultures. Would anybody like to take that one on?
I'll actually start. I think one of the reasons why we still judge people. I think one of the reasons why we still judge people is because we don't know how to come to the table constructively in dialogue. It's okay to disagree. And here's the reality. Everybody's not excited about this work. Everybody's not interested in doing equity. But the reality is it's such a necessary part of our conversations and our learning, because that's what's happening across the globe. And turn on the news in any day at any time, and you see racial conflict occurring across the globe. And so how do we teach our students to address that? You know, it's not enough to just sweep it under the carpet and pretend like it doesn't exist. It does exist. And each and every day when we walk into the world, we're faced in some way, shape, or form. And so I talked about teaching our students how to be change agents, not passively, but change agents. And even from an elementary school level, you heard Julie Smith talk about some of the things that we're doing. And that's because it's important to start this dialogue and conversation and learning early on in life. Here's an interesting statistic. I don't know how many of you around the table know at what age students begin to notice differences in skin color. 3 years old. 3 years old. So it's necessary for us to have this dialogue and to come to the table. And so we understand that everybody's not going to share the same perspective. Everybody's not excited about it. But help us be a part of the change. Help us to be a part of the solution and come to the table, even if your perspective is different than what's shared.
Thank you.
I think as a parent of interracial children, it's important for us, my wife and I, to empower our children with knowledge and information and their culture, both sides. And growing up, to your point, Lauren, you know, the education piece was lacking. We knew about the Civil War and slavery, Martin Luther King, and then it kind of just disappears. There's nothing in between. There's no history. There's no information in between. There's no readings or authors or scientists or theologians that you are known about or discussed. The only reason why I knew about a lot of those folks was because I had a family who made it so. They empowered me with that information. I had an extended family, which included white people who were allies and friends to us, who empowered me with that information. And I think we need to do that same thing here. Especially as a parent, I want my kids to be empowered. And I want them to understand where they come from, what they bring, to know that they have significance and they should be acknowledged. And I think that we should celebrate that. And I think that's what the work is heading in our schools, to do just that. But it's important that we don't lose sight of, again, that intentional piece to make sure that we are executing on that goal. But again, as a parent, knowing that at some point, my fear, to be honest with all of you and those who are listening, my fear had always been when my son was going to reach middle school, because I had known at that point, that's where he was going to encounter something that was going to be derogatory against who he is and what he looks like. And so maybe a year or two prior to that, started to introduce some things to him and started to talk about him, because I didn't want him to come into a setting where he was going to be blindsided by something he didn't understand. Mm-hmm. And to have it given to him by someone who doesn't understand what they were saying. So for us to have these conversations and to have that development of understanding for all students is crucial to diffusing that concept. So again, as a parent and for other parents who are out there who have Black or brown children at home, there's work to be done there as well to empower and educate your children and help them get their voice, Julie, to understand who they are and where they come from, and be able to carry that with them as they go. But then to have the intentional work of our faculty and staff to again help them go through that, as you all are also understanding all of our place in the society and how we interact and how we do better by each other is equally important.
And how, just to follow up on that, how do you see, again, this is for anybody to respond to, how do you see the schools and families partnering together best to enable this so that parents of Black and brown kids don't have to worry that they have to prep their kids for school, right? For these difficult school spaces. How do you see this? How the school is working together, or ideas for going forward to partnering with parents, working with families, bringing schools and families together on this issue? Julie.
I don't know if I have the right answer, but I think what it seems to me is it's all about your culture building, and that you're just putting yourself in a position to always be available to listen, right? You're really just, I think something that we think about at our school is just making sure that all voices are heard from our families, that families always know if they have a question where to go. We hope that's directly to us and not on social media or anything like that. And I think it's really important for us to just be available in whatever form and way that a parent wants to communicate with us, or a staff member or a student, and we're there and we listen genuinely. And I think that goes a long way when people feel heard and listened to.
I'm going to comment, and then I'm going to ask the students if they might want to comment on a particular experience. So I think building relationships is so important. I think, there was an equity audit done on the district, and I think individually, when we come in and work with our students, we should be recognizing what students are thriving, what students are not thriving, what students are, empowered to be, even if it's the quiet voice in the class, the voice that's heard and the voice that contributes, and, that every student's goals are achieved and what they want to see, at their highest level of fruition is possible, but not only possible, that it's fostered here. And I think super important is connecting with families and really knowing who your kids' family, the parents are, or guardians are, or who they're with at home, or their sibling, or whoever it is that is their person, that you are connected in support of that student, and the student knows that there's a partnership which the student is involved in. And so, there's so much that can be achieved with those solid relationships that are very intentionally created and continuously cultivated. From the student perspective, I think, yes, a lot has changed since maybe we went to college, and for the better, as we're moving in that direction. I think that for students to be the teachers is so valuable. And so, as teachers or as educators, as parents, we need to create those opportunities for conversations and opportunities for projects where students just can blow us away with what they learn from one another and their reflections on that. I think that's really important for students to hear what other students have appreciated about what they bring to the table. Questions that are asked mindfully and thoughtfully, even if it's a question that, listen, this is something I don't know. There's so much within this conversation that we're not going to know. And, I know Dr. Morgan talks a lot about intention versus impact, and I think that's really important. I have gained so much in my learning from working with families and working with parents. And, I have parents who I've worked with, and, parents who I've partnered with, and, a parent that's just shared so much with me about cultural enrichment and engagement and tough conversations. And that has been so incredibly valuable to me. I wonder from the student perspective, if they might want to share, project-based learning opportunity or an opportunity where maybe they got to do the teaching or they learned from another student.
Usually chances where you are able to express yourself in your own culture is usually beginning of the school year during like icebreakers, but depending on like a teacher asks you to like do a project on who you think you are and how you see yourself and how you want to present yourself to the people around you. And I think that is like probably the best way to bring your culture to the table, or to bring yourself to the table in a way that is like respectful, as well as where people will listen, obviously, because you want to know one another and who you're going to be with around the school year. And it's a really good opportunity to learn about who people are and obviously their backgrounds. If you are questioning and ask respect, it helps learn how to ask respectfully instead of disrespectfully in a way, because the teacher's there. So that's just my input, really.
Thank you, Avyanna.
Jacob, can I ask you a question about your PBL? So what did your grade do for a project? And can you talk a little bit about if you thought that was a positive experience?
Yeah, there was 3 options on the project. You could do environmental change, mental health, and cultural awareness. And a lot of people did cultural awareness. And I think kids learn from other projects to show like equality, that you shouldn't be racist towards anyone, you shouldn't judge anyone, and to treat everyone nice.
Great. Thanks for those examples. I think it's really helpful, again, for those of us who aren't in the classroom to hear that. Yeah.
So I think it's so interesting, and thank you both for what you brought to the table, because when you talk about identity, it's not, I think there's something lost somewhere along the way. Sometimes it feels like all of the work should be on us, on those of us who are white, learning about these other cultures. But I think there's work for those of us who are white to face our own understanding of who we are and why we believe the things we do. When I was in my doctoral program, we did a lot of work around racism and facing racism and understanding anti-bias. And I can remember turning to one of my colleagues and saying, I work in Beverly, right? Like there's not a lot of diversity compared to those people who are working in the Boston public schools. And so, why is this important for me? But I think the realization is this is really the most important place where that work needs to be done, and that it's our job to take on that work and to understand that work, because it's not Dr. Morgan's job to come in and do the work for us to figure out what we need to do. It's our job to take on the responsibility of what we all need to do to make the world a better and more equitable experience for everyone. So it's not about putting all of the emphasis on you and what conversation you're going to have with your son, or on you to figure out what your identity is and how you can feel good about it. It's really on all of us to understand who we all are and how we all fit into this big picture, because that's the only way that I think we're going to make progress going forward.
That's great. And just a follow-up question that we have that relates to that. This question actually comes from a Beverly High School student, and that is, how do we help white teachers have these difficult conversations in the classroom?
Right. That's a great question. And I would love, if you have some ideas over there from the students or from the teachers, I know that as a district, we're doing a lot of that work. But I think we would love to hear even more, because it is that student voice that will help us understand some of that. It's a tough one. I know we threw at you quick.
It's the pop quiz.
I can maybe start, because Jacob is really cheering me on over here. And then maybe the students might have some additional follow-up questions. So, I think a lot of things come down to comfort level. And let's be honest, like a lot of things are uncomfortable and need to be uncomfortable. And being uncomfortable doesn't mean that a person is bad or that the situation is is bad, or that, we can't grow in tremendous ways. And so, and that's where we're going to grow. And so I think, creating norms in the classroom discussion, I've heard from a lot of my students, they don't want conversations to be shut down. They want that opportunity. And it's like, you can address so much in the curriculum with discussions, and like we're doing right now, like Socratic discussions. And so I think really giving a platform for, this is how we're going to speak in our classroom, having the students generate the norms. Like, what do you guys think the norms should be? And then, we're going to talk to one another with a little bit of grace. If something, lands on us that we don't like, we're going to manage that with grace, because we might recognize that that's someone trying to contribute in their own way. And then therefore we're encouraging the conversation to continue. And so, as uncomfortable as it may be, having the conversation is what the students are begging for. And what we've seen is when you're having the conversations, the kids will just blow you away with their wisdom. They will just like, we can't compete with what they're bringing to this table. And so if you guys feel comfortable, maybe you could kind of share, if you would like to be able to participate in classroom conversations, if that would be valuable, and maybe what the norms could be around, or the rules of conversation could be. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, again, not to put you students on the spot, but can you think of any specific norms that you talked about, or maybe that you put forward, or that you remember a friend put forward in the classroom to help things, to help have these difficult conversations?
And maybe norm is a strange word. The rules of the conversation, right? Yeah, you agree? It's a strange word. So
sorry, I speak strange sometimes.
No, I said it. Maybe I think that, do you want to have conversations in the classroom, and if so, what would be some rules for students engaging in those conversations?
Usually conversations like this would be set up like a Socratic seminar, especially like in English, where the rules are really just, you can't interrupt anyone when they're talking, or don't intervene, or just be respectful overall of what someone else is saying. Even if what they're saying you don't agree with, just wait until they're done, and then you can state your opinion in a respectful way, but without being rude, obviously, because everyone has different opinions and perspectives of everything pretty much. And I just think that overall being able to address it is a big step, because it helps students and faculty of color feel more safe and comfortable in their environment, and it creates a good environment for everyone, because being around a bunch of white kids and white staff can be a little isolating to students and faculty of color. So just knowing that you are aware of the problems happening in the world, or like racial issues happening in the world, it's comforting just addressing it, because I know sometimes it could be uncomfortable, but it's better than to address it than not say anything at all, because it makes it seem like you don't know what's happening and why a student can feel unsafe in a school. So
that's really helpful. Thank you. Jacob, did you want to add anything, or no? Okay. So if I facilitate another one of these, I'm going to give you all red cards, and when I use a weird word, you can put it down on the table.
Can I add just,
Yeah, sure.
You asked about how we can support some of the white teachers, and how, and I think back to Lauren's comment at the very beginning that, the curriculum that we went through, we didn't read the literature. I grew up in Peabody and went through Peabody Public Schools. And when I went through, we were we had a very white culture that I went through. And so I think some of the things that are happening now and how we're supporting some teachers in that is in the expansion of what we're using for curriculum. And remember, sometimes the teachers are reading these pieces of literature for the first time along with you, instead, whereas in the past they had read the novel many, many times and they were just facilitating a discussion. But I think that it's actually exciting, because I do think that a lot of our teachers who are white are really excited about the opportunity to learn more about these cultures and some of the pieces that they're choosing to read. So in 8th grade, they read, I think the whole 8th grade read Long Way Down, which is a prose book that has a really strong imagery, and it allows you to kind of really understand more about what it's like to be a Black urban student, right? And so, but that was their first experience with that as well. It wasn't as if they had this in their back pocket and they could bring it to you. You were all doing that together. And so I think that those experiences will make all of us stronger, no matter what our cultural background. So those are the ways that we hope that we're growing together. And those discussions in those classrooms, Avyanna, we hope for sure that they're all coming together and that everyone's voice is heard and that everyone feels comfortable being able to express how, and it is hard. So we all know how hard it is. We are experiencing how hard it is every day. But it's really important for us to do this work.
Yeah, thank you. And I like what Avyanna said too about, being able to talk, because I've been using the term equity a lot, but of course there's the opportunity and access. And it sounds like, such a big part of the education here is helping students learn how to talk and learn how to listen, especially when the going gets tough, right? Because it's never going to be easy. I just wanted to there are more questions about curriculum, but I feel like they're sort of detailed. I don't think we're going to be able to get into them tonight. So maybe a future panel on the curriculum. But we did have, maybe just to change directions a little bit, we had a question about how are middle school students supported when they encounter racist incidents. So we've been talking a little bit about the curriculum, but if anybody wants to speak to, how are students, and I guess it doesn't just have to be middle school, if you have experience in elementary school, how are students in the Beverly District treated, approached, supported when they encounter a racist incident?
Well, I can answer, but I also wanted to ask Jacob a quick question, if that's
Sure,
okay.
yes, please.
I wanted to ask about, on the heels of our previous question, what the benefits are of being able to have discussions. What are the positives that can come out of discussions? Because I know you have a lot to say about that.
It can have an impact on what others think on different cultures, and to other cultures can learn about them, and then they can all come together and build relationships and friendships to end being rude to one another and spreading awareness.
That's awesome, Jacob. And I think that building relationship piece ties in to your question, Lauren. So when there's an incident and a student reports an incident, I think it's important for teachers, counselors, administrators, students involved to have a discussion about it. And then, it depends on exactly what the incident is. However, I think validating the student and having the student feel like they're heard, that there's a appropriate resolution to what has happened, that they feel supported in the process, and that people are taking them seriously. They're considering the impact of what has transpired. And what we've done often this year, and I've really been so happy that my students have been able to be a part of it, is we've had a lot of restorative conversations where students are talking to one another and saying, this is how this made me feel. Some of those are student directed and the adults are just sitting back watching. This is how this impacted me. I need to let you know. This might have been your intention. This is how it felt. And then the student could say, wow, this was my intention, or this is really, changing my perspective, or I'm sorry that this happened. And, whatever the punitive consequence is, I think that that's been a real spot of growth to watch these middle school students engage in these conversations and restorative circles, especially when they're student facilitated. That's really awesome. Just making sure that, involving families in the conversation, involving parents, making sure that the incident has been resolved to where it needs to go and to where the student feels safe and validated.
Yeah, thank you.
And I think I would offer that in supporting students in this context, one of the things that has been important for me since my arrival at the district is talking to students, visiting the schools to the degree that I'm able, and going into classrooms and having conversations and making myself available for questions that they might have, and responding with transparency and openness. And many of those questions have been about my own experience and what that means and where that's taken me on my journey. And so being able to, again, come to the table with that kind of honesty and transparency has been pretty important. I don't think that there's a magic bullet response to how to address student conflict, but I want to piggyback on Heather's comment, because I think one of the tools that we help students with is not just, having a conversation is not as simple as sitting down and talking, because everybody doesn't have that context. And you need the tools to be able to do that, and the strategies to be able to navigate through difference. And so I think that that's one of the things that we're working to do, not just with students, but with staff as well. And it's giving folks the tools. And going back to the earlier question about why teachers aren't having the conversations in the classrooms, because there needs to be some give and take with everybody who's having the conversation. So it's not just on the teacher or on a particular student to navigate and drive that conversation, but it's on everybody to say, all right, this is a safe space to be able to share those things that are on your mind, those perceptions that might not land right on some people, but to be able to talk through those things versus getting angry and yelling at each other, and spewing slurs and other language that isn't helpful for our growth and development, just as people collectively. And so I think that there are a number of measures that get put in place to support students with conflict, to support our own faculty, but that's ongoing development, if you will, ongoing training and growth and coaching, and really being able to give some tools to add to the toolbox, everybody's toolbox, to be able to use, because the experience doesn't stop when you leave Beverly Public Schools. There's a wider world waiting for each of us beyond Beverly, Massachusetts, and it's important that our students and our teachers and our staff and all of our stakeholders can be able to navigate effectively, again, in order to be change agents.
That's great. And that sounds like a good, we have a couple more minutes left, but that sounds like a good way to maybe end things now. I know there are some more questions, and we could go on for a while. Oh, I'm sorry, Jacob, go ahead. Yeah.
I agree with Dr. Morgan when he said having conversation with classrooms when he had a big Google Meet, and he said something, he had an incident with a cop on the highway when he pulled them over, and I think the kids took that to show them on how there is racial issues out there that they don't know about that could happen to them. And I think they took that to know and learn about it themselves.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's always helpful to hear the specific examples. And I think, one thing I'm really taking away tonight is everything I heard about the rich efforts for conversation, the commitment to dialogue, to create these brave spaces to talk, the restorative circles that are going on, and so much of this led by students is really exciting, because I think, what I like to think about dialogue is it's the way for particulars and differences to emerge so that our common humanity can be seen and experienced in a much richer way. So it's not about pretending we're all the same, but it's not about stopping with difference. It's a way of sharing and seeing that we all have fears. We all love our kids. We all want to learn. We all have something exciting in our culture, et cetera. So I'm just really excited and again, grateful to everybody who came out tonight on a school night. This recording is going to be available on the BevCam YouTube and the district website. And again, I think we had put on the link the equity audit, if you hadn't yet seen that. And I believe that we're going to be continuing the conversation, right? The conversation is ongoing. Yes, it is lifelong learning. Even though I'm a trained facilitator, my husband frequently has to remind me, don't you do dialogue? And I say, not at home. So yes, very grateful for everyone coming out tonight, and for all of you at home who joined us as well. We hope to see you in person soon.